Hi, boys and girls. We're continuing with Mr. Louie, Screwy, Chapter 8, Teachers in Love. For the rest of my life, I would have to live with the fact that I kissed Andrea, but had to be a man about it. The next morning, Andrea and Emily and the other girls were all whispery and giggly. Did Miss Daisy hadn't come in yet. I put my book bag away and marched over to Andrea. I just want you to know that I still hate you, I told her. I only kissed you because I drank the love potion Mr. Louie put in the water fountain. I know, Andrea said. I hate you too, Arlo. Good, I said, as long as we're in agreement. But guess what, Arlo? Your butt, I replied. Anytime someone says guess what, you should say your butt. That's the first rule of being a kid. Miss Daisy has a boyfriend, she said, all excited. What? No way. She does, said Emily. Who is it? I asked. Mr. Mackey, Andrea said, and all the girls collapsed in giggles. Ryan and me and some of the boys came over. Miss Daisy and Mr. Mackey, Ryan asked, girlfriend and boyfriend, impossible. How do you know? I asked Andrea. Haven't you noticed they've been hanging around each other a lot lately? Andrea said, and sometimes they walk to school together. Mr. Mackey's always coming into our class, said Annette, even when he doesn't have reading, when we don't have reading. I saw them all goo-goo-eyed at each other at the Clutstock, Emily said. They're in love. And this morning, Andrea whispered, I walked by the reading recovery room, and then I saw them holding hands. The reading recovery room is Mr. Mackey's office. The girls collapsed in giggles again. Maybe they were just shaking hands, I said. They weren't shaking hands, Arlo. They were holding hands. Maybe Mr. Mackey was putting her under arrest, I suggested. He held her hand so she couldn't escape. He wasn't arresting her, Arlo, Andrea said. Maybe they were arm wrestling, I guess. They weren't arm wrestling, Arlo, said Andrea. They're in love. Ugh, disgusting. Maybe they're going to get married, Emily said. Maybe they can't get married, Neil, the new kid, said. They're teachers. If Miss Daisy marries Mr. Mackey, she'll be Mrs. Mackey, Aunt Annette said. Maybe she'll keep her name. Andrea said, lots of women do that. Then she'll be Mrs. Daisy. Maybe she'll combine their two names and she'll be Mrs. Mackey or Mrs. Dackey or Mrs. Maisie. All the girls were giggling and gossiping with Miss Daisy what Miss Daisy should wear to her wedding and where she and Mr. Mackey would go on their honeymoon. There isn't going to be a honeymoon. They're not going out. Who's not going out? Somebody asked behind me. It was Miss Daisy. Everybody stopped talking. Where were you, Miss Daisy? Asked Ryan. I was in the reading recovery room, Miss Daisy said. Andrea said, looking at me. Is Mr. Mackey your boyfriend? Demanded Michael. Oh, I don't know, Miss Daisy giggled, but her face turned red like a tomato. There's a sure sign that somebody has something to hide. You'll have to ask. She didn't get a chance to finish her sentence because guess who walked into the room at that very moment? Nobody. Because if you walked into a door, that would hurt. But guess who walked into the doorway? It was Mr. Mackey. Miss Daisy, is Miss Daisy your girlfriend? We all asked. Mr. Mackey didn't say a word. Instead, he leaned over and kissed Miss Daisy. Ugh, disgusting. They were smooching. Call the nurse. I thought I was going to throw up. Ooh, Ryan said Miss Daisy and Mr. Mackey are in love. When are you going to get married? Asked Michael. Next Sunday, replied Miss Daisy. What? Chapter 9, Mrs. Dackey and Mr. Maisie. This had to be a joke. Miss Daisy and Mr. Mackey couldn't get married, but it was true. Miss Daisy told us that Mr. Mackey had been her boyfriend for a long time, and they kept it a secret. Then it's Clutstock, he got down on one knee and proposed to her. Miss Daisy showed us her engagement ring. It's beautiful, said all the girls. Miss Daisy and Mr. Mackey are going to get married on Sunday, and our whole class was invited to the wedding. Mr. Louie, who used to be a judge, was going to marry them in a church. Well, the girls got all super girly, even girlier than usual. They're all hugging Miss Daisy and giggling and crying and saying how happy they were. Is your new name going to be Miss Mackey? Asked Andrea. How about Mrs. Mackey, Dackey, or Mrs. Maisie? Said Ryan. Geez, I don't know, Miss Daisy said, who didn't know anything. Maybe I'll hyphenate my name. Once they had to hyphenate me at a pee-wee football game, I said. I almost passed out. But then they gave me something to drink and I was okay. That's hydrate, dumbhead, Andrea told us. Hyphenate means to put a dash between two words. I knew that, I lied. Mr. Mackey and Miss Daisy were all lovey-dovey, making gooey eyes at each other. The girls started planning the wedding. They were talking about what they were going to wear, what presents they should bring, and who Miss Daisy and Mr. Mackey's children would look like. I pulled the guys over to the other side of the room. We huddled like a football team. This is horrible, I told them. This is the worst day in the history of the world. What's the big deal, AJ, said Michael. People get married all the time. But yeah, Mr. Mackey and Miss Daisy are in love, I told him. He only asked her to marry him because of the love potion Mr. Louie put in the water fountain. I think it was nice that Miss Daisy's going to get married, said Neil, the new kid. Don't you get it? I told Neil. Miss Daisy is the perfect teacher. She can't read, write, or do math. But if she gets married, she might have a baby and quit working. Then we'll get a real teacher. AJ's right, Ryan said. A real teacher will force us to learn stuff. That would be horrible, agreed Michael. So what can we do about it? Asked Neil. There's only one thing we can do. We have to stop the wedding, I told them. Chapter 10, Sabotage. Did you ever hear the word sabotage? It's a great word. Sabotage is a fancy word to say mess stuff up. I'm really good at messing stuff up. I learned about sabotage from a spy movie. These good guys blew up a truck to sabotage some bad guys. It was cool. But how do you sabotage a wedding? Blowing up a truck would probably not be a good idea. Maybe we can leave a trail of bonbons leading away from the church, suggested Ryan. Then Miss Daisy will follow the trail and miss her own wedding. She's dumb, Michael said, but she's not that dumb. We have to convince her that she shouldn't marry Mr. Mackey, I told the guys. How do we do that? Asked Neil, the new kid. Andrea and the other girls will mess everything up. Neil was right. If we tried to convince Miss Daisy not to marry Mr. Mackey, the girls would sure to sabotage our plan. But then I remembered something. In the morning, all the girls were going to the nurse's office to be weighed and measured with Miss Cooney. It would be our big chance. The next morning, I waited until the girls left before telling Miss Daisy we had a wedding present for her. I love presents, she said. I went to my cubby and got out my old skateboard. I put a ribbon around it to make it look better. There's gum in the wheels, so don't spin it. It doesn't spin fast anymore, I told her. But we just wanted you to have it. Oh, thank you, AJ, Miss Daisy said as she gave me a hug. That was so thoughtful. We're really happy you and Mr. Mackey are getting married, I lied. Yeah, we think it's great, said Ryan. I'm glad to hear you boys say that, Miss Daisy said. It's nice that you fell in love with Mr. Mackey, I told her, even though he's different. Different, Miss Daisy asked. What's different about him? Well, did you know that Mr. Mackey has 6 toes? I asked. Really? I didn't know that, Miss Daisy said, who didn't know anything. Yep, 6 toes on each foot, I said. And they're webbed, added Michael like a duck. Well, nobody's perfect, Miss Daisy, said Miss Daisy. It didn't seem to bother her. It didn't seem to bother Miss Daisy that she was marrying a guy with webbed feet. I would have to try something else. You know, I was in the post office yesterday with my mom, I told her, and guess whose picture was on the wall? Mr. Mackey's. Is that so? Said Miss Daisy. Yeah. I told her, did you know he robbed a bank in Texas? I didn't know that, Miss Daisy said. I hear he's wanted for a string of armed robberies in Oklahoma, too, said Neil, the new kid. Oh dear, exclaimed Miss Daisy. He's not even a real reading teacher, Michael said. He kidnapped our reading teacher and is holding him for ransom. That happens all the time, you know. My word, Miss Daisy said. I heard that he snores too, I mentioned. It's like sleeping in the room with a moose. Miss Daisy said. It was working like a charm. You could tell Miss Daisy was thinking things over. Maybe she should change her mind about marrying Mr. Mackey. Speaking of which, guess who came in at that very moment? Mr. Mackey. He kissed Miss Daisy and told her he could hang out in the reading recovery room when he did a lesson with us. Perfect. Now we could work on him. We wanted to tell you how happy we are about you and Miss Daisy, I told Mr. Mackey. Yeah, we think it's great we're getting married, said you guys are getting married, said Ryan. I'm glad we have your support, boys, Mr. Mackey said. Let's open our reading books to page 23. Yeah, it's nice that you fell in love with Miss Daisy, even though she's different, I told him. What's different about her, he said. Well, for one thing, she's addicted to bonbons, I told him. So am I, said Mr. Mackey. Miss Daisy and I have a lot in common. Let's turn to page 23. Did you know she eats her own boogers? That's what Miss Daisy does. Really? Said Mr. Mackey. That's great. If she eats her own boogers, she won't have to do much grocery shopping. Page 23, please. She doesn't eat her own boogers, Michael said. She blows her nose into a trash can. Terrific, said Mr. Mackey. We'll have save money on tissues. Let's turn to page 23. Mr. Mackey is wacky. Did you know that Miss Daisy likes burning ants with magnifying glass for the fun of it, said Neil the new kid. Yes, Mr. Mackey applied. That's what we did in our first date. Page 23. Our sabotage plan was totally not working with Mr. Mackey. It was time to use the one weapon I knew would work for sure. Mr. Mackey is a reading teacher. He loves reading more than anything else. Did you know that Mrs. Daisy doesn't know how to read? I asked. Do you really want to marry a dumbhead? Yes, said Mr. Mackey. That's why I asked her to marry her. I've been searching for years to find a woman who would let me read to her. I slapped my forehead. It was useless. There was no way to convince Mr. Mackey not to marry Miss Daisy. Miss Daisy came back into the classroom. Mr. Mackey whispered something in her ear. We're glad you boys are concerned about us, Mr. Mackey said, but Miss Daisy and I are in love. We hope we'll see you at the church on Sunday. And they started smooching again. Ugh, disgusting. We were all depressed. On our way home, we looked at Mr. Louie. We told Mr. Louie about our plan to sabotage the wedding had failed. You can't stop love, Mr. Louie said. It's like I told you, dudes. Love is stronger than hate. Love is the most powerful thing in the world. That's when I got the most genius idea. In fact, I got 2 genius ideas. But I'm not going to tell you what they are. Okay, I'll tell you. But you'll have to read the next chapter. Nanny, nanny, boo-boo on you.